The Bible is from the mouth of God. It gives us instruction and examples on how to live as Christians, and it gives us inspiration and hope. Not to mention, it also has a variety of songs, poems, lamentations, prayers, and psalms, written by a vast amount of different people. And yet, they remain cohesive to the overall goal of the Bible, which is to help us so that we may give glory to God. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of the darkness into His wonderful light. 1 Peter 2:9. The Bible was made for every Christian. However, despite its broad audience, the Word of God can also be very personal. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalms 139:14. For example, there are many verses where you can substitute pronouns and names so that it can be easier to meditate on. God will protect Sam from those who malign him. Psalms 12:5. Even though Carla walks through the darkest valley, she will fear no evil, for you are with her. Psalms 23:4. The Lord has done it this very day. Let me rejoice and be glad. Psalms 118:24. Because of this, it means that we need to read the gospel to see what God says about us and our circumstances. Since the Word was made specifically for me, I wanted to reflect that personalizing principle by making a cover for my own Bible. And here is the Bible I'm going to be redesigning. As you can see, it's not an old-fashioned leather-bound Bible. It's a large print, paper-bound one. It has a nice picture of some sailboats on the ocean, riding against the sunrise or sunset, whatever you prefer. It has a fancy title, and it is an NIV, which I think means New International Version. On the back, it gives a very, very, very basic summary of what happens in the Bible. Open this book and discover how God created the world, watched it turn against His purpose, lived among us, was still rejected because He didn't fit expectations, turned everything upside down to get things back on track, and now invites you to find your place in the story of God. It's a nice introduction, I'm not gonna lie. In case you're wondering, my mom bought me this Bible because the one that I was using needs some work. I know that the outside appearance isn't that important. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. I just want to be able to take a nice looking Bible to church that won't make people think, man, if her Bible's a mess, her life must be too. I'm kind of joking, but there are people who do think like that, even though it's not true. But I still want something nice. So first things first, I need to plan out what exactly I'm going to make. Like Jesus said, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? Luke 14:28. This verse is basically saying to think things through before you do it. The paper I'm using to sketch with is just regular scrap paper, and I'm using a normal graphite pencil to pencil it in. Nothing too fancy. So I originally thought about having a girl on the front with a bunch of flowers blooming around her, or coming out of her, or something like that. Because I wanted to show how much you'll grow when you actually study the Bible and do what it says. Plus, it's usually the kind of thing I like to make. But I just wasn't feeling it. For some reason, I just couldn't get inspired to go through with that idea. Yes, this was the kind of thing I would usually make, and there is nothing wrong with painting girls or flowers on a Bible. But I wanted to do something different that was me, but also biblical. So I stopped for a bit. It's good to step away when you feel mentally tired from drawing, especially if you don't know what you're drawing. Then I went back to working on it again. But this time I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I had decided to make a lion. Not just any lion though. It's going to be a pinkish lion with sheep horns and flowers growing from its leafy mane. In case you couldn't tell, it's supposed to represent Jesus. He is the Lion of Judah, and the Lamb who was slain. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Revelation 5:5. Then I looked and heard the voices of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne, and the living creatures, and elders. In a loud voice they were saying, Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power, and wealth, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and praise. Revelation 5:11-12. I wanted to do this because Jesus is the reason that we are even going to heaven. If he wasn't sacrificed, I would be on my way to hell right now. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. I wanted to show how strong and kingly he is by the fact that he's a lion with sheep horns, while also showing how gentle and pure he is with the flowers and the color scheme. In a way, it kind of reminds me of a similar picture I made a while ago, which also had a lion with flowers growing out of it. Alright, now that I have an idea of what I want to paint, I need to make the actual cover. First, I measure the sides. Now we can start making the cover. The paper I'm using is Canson watercolor paper. This paper may not be super professional, but I think it's suitable for what I need it for. I'm a very firm believer that you don't need expensive supplies to make good art. People shouldn't worry about what they use to create. Just go for it. As my dad once said, it's not what you use, it's how you use it. But this is a topic for another day. The thing I'm using to cut the paper with is a swing line paper trimmer. You can get one on Amazon for about $30 or so, which is pretty cheap compared to other cutters. The reason why I'm using this to cut the paper is because it's more straight and precise than scissors, and you can actually measure out the amount of paper you're cutting, which is great since we are making a book cover. So if you do projects that involve a lot of paper cutting and don't want to spend too much money, I highly recommend getting this. Alright, now that I have the front all cut up, I can make the sketch. I'm using a reference, of course, to make the lion at least look like a lion. It's not going to be all that realistic. For example, I gave the lion a big, leafy mane, and I don't think the proportions are exactly correct. So I do my best to make one side of the face look like the other. It was quite the challenge because I'm more used to drawing faces from the side and not straight on. But it's good practice anyway. I don't really spend too much time trying to correct a face because in this case, I think it's better to progress than to perfect. It's like in life when people want to pursue their dreams, but never do because they're too concerned with being perfect rather than progressing. I fell into that trap too. I mean, I'm still not completely perfect, but I'm progressing. I spent over half a year trying to make my website perfect, and I wasted a lot of time that could have been spent building up my ministry and making blogs. Don't misunderstand me. It's important to put time and effort into what you are doing, but be careful not to get stuck on it for too long. You will learn as you go along, and you'll be a lot better than when you've started. Alright, now the sketching is done. I'm somewhat satisfied with the way the sketch came out, but now we need to pick a color scheme. I decided to go with some blues, purples, pinks, and greens. The reason why I chose these colors is because I like them and I'm more familiar with them. I have an idea of what kind of background I want, but I want to test it on some scrap paper to see how it looks. I decided to make my background with a blue bonnet base with a wash of watered down award blue. I chose this combination because it looks so soft and chill, and I think it will go nicely with the lion. Now I wait for it to dry. I do some important stuff as I wait. Alright, now it's dry and I can go over the sketch to redefine some stuff. I sometimes do this when it's wet because I'm in a hurry, but this time there is no rush and it doesn't take long to dry. That's what I like about acrylics. They dry so much faster compared to other mediums. I hear that oils in general take days to dry. As much as I want to try oils, I don't want to wait that long because when I get inspired, I want to do it now. So now that the paint is dry, we can start on the face. For the base coat, I used lavender sachet. I used fuchsia for the shading, defining certain areas like the muzzle and head, and for accents like in the eyes and nose. I also watered it down in some parts so that it's more softer. The award blue in English Navy was used for the deeper shadows and for defining other parts of the head. I used blue bonnet for the eyes and for the shine of the nose because I thought that it would be cute. For some of the fur texture, I used a more opaque lavender sachet and antique parchment, and kind of splotted it in the direction the fur would usually go. Splotting is a term I made up, which is a combination of dotting and splotches. I usually try to start on the face before I do any other body part because it is the focus and I want to put in as much detail as possible. After I did the face, I moved on to the horns. For the base, I used blue bonnet. I used fuchsia for the shading and lavender sachet for the swirls. I added a little Atlantis for color too. Now onto the mane. I used award blue as a base because I think it's easier to add texture after you've put in the darkest color first. But then I decided to add English Navy for extra shading. Then I added Arbor Green to make it more leaf-like. Next, I added some Atlantis for lighting and some specks of lavender sachet for color. I'm not using any fancy brush techniques. I'm just using a round brush flat against the paper to make the leaves more natural looking. I guess it was kind of pointless to redraw the flowers because now I can't even see them. Oh well, I will just add some blots of fuchsia to make the roses. They don't look like anything yet, but after the paint dries, I'll be able to go over it with color and add detail to make them more like roses. I'm not arranging them in any particular way, I just put them where I think they'll look the best. I really like doing this because it makes the flowers more bold, it gives the picture more dimension, and it's fun to just add blobs of paint. Now that it's done, we just have to wait for it to dry, which will take a while. So I'll take this as an opportunity to work on the spine and the back of the book. Alright, now I'm going to do the same thing that I did for my cover and sketch out what to paint. I think I'll draw a rose with a leaf with some thorns coming out of it, and after much consideration, I think I'll add a butterfly to get rid of the empty space. Because, well, why not? I think that this stuff is fun and easy to make. Plus, it'll fit the motif. I wasn't quite sure of what to write in the box, so I just kind of wrote what came to mind. For the spine, I just did something very simple. I just put a rose on one side and a leaf on the other with the words Holy Bible smack dab in the middle. Now it's time to paint the backgrounds. I apply a base coat of blue bonnet and a wash of award blue. Again. Now we just have to wait for them to dry. And now they are finally dry. As you can see, however, the sketch is completely covered and I now have to start over. So I used the clips from my recordings to get a general idea of what I made and where I placed it. It didn't take too long to put everything back. Now I can work on the fun part, the painting. I decided to start off by putting on globs of fuchsia to make roses like I did with the ones on the mane, so that it can dry as soon as possible. Speaking of which, the roses on the mane are finally dry enough to work with. Yay! So what I do is take a very tiny fine brush, dip it in lavender sachet, and paint the swirls in the roses. like this part because you get really up close and personal. You have to be very gentle and take your time. Some people may find this part nerve-wracking, but I think it's very relaxing. Then I wait for that paint to dry. And then I added a wash of Award Blue to the bottom half of the roses. I find this shading technique to be quite effective because it's simple and makes the object rounder. While I wait for that to dry, I'll work on the other roses. I just make some swirls like I did with the cover, except they're bigger and there's more of them. So that's done, and it looks pretty nice, if I do say so myself. Now we add the Award Blue. I will start on the thorns next. For the base color, I decided to go with Award Blue. To be honest, I probably should have done this first because it's under the rose and would have been easier to paint. Oh well, nothing I can do now. I'll just have to be very careful. Now I will add Atlantis on top, with lavender sachet for the highlights. That way it's more cohesive. Also, I decided to add fuchsia to the underside because I think it would look cool and make the thorns more dimensional. To be honest, it would be pretty difficult to explain how or why I shade stuff the way I do. I kinda hope that someday when I develop my skill more, I'll be able to explain it better. But for now, I guess I can sum it up by saying, because it looks cool. Alright, if I'm going to do the thorn, I might as well do the leaf too, since they are both the green of the flower, as I like to call it. Again, I'm just kind of doing the same thing as I did with the thorn, except it's a leaf, you know? I think it just makes both of them more unified. Now that the greens are done, for the most part, I can work on the butterfly. The butterfly I'm painting is just a made-up species so that I can fit in with the color scheme. It's not that deep. For the colors, I used Award Blue for the base, Atlantis and Lavender Sachet for the design, and Fuchsia for the body. And then I added a wash of Award Blue to the wings and body to give it more dimension. Next up, the big rose that's on the middle of the lion and the thorn coming out of it. Let's take one last look at the covers to see how everything looks. Everything looks fine. Nothing seems to be wet or anything, and everything has been painted. Of course, now I need to add the finishing touches. When I say finishing touches, I usually mean doing stuff with pencils that I can't with paint, like adding text, texture, sometimes I fix mistakes. But anyway, I'll try to explain how and why I use certain pencils. For the text, I used a very light colored pencil because I'm one of the few people who thinks that light on dark looks better than vice versa. I don't really have a specific way for how I pick certain colors. I just try to go with ones that might go with the picture. For example, some blues, greens, pinks, and purples would look pretty good with this. One of my favorite colors to use is China Blue. It's very nice and pigmented. I use it for pretty much everything. I don't go too crazy with the textures. I just add some lines to give the illusion of texture. To be honest, it's amazing what adding a few lines can do. I'm done decorating the covers. Now comes the trickier part, adding the Mod Podge. For those of you who don't know, Mod Podge is a water-based sealer, glue, and finish. It's owned by the same people who own Apple Barrel, which is Plaid. You know, I never realized how much I use Plaid's products. Maybe it's just because they're so cheap. You can get about 8 ounces of this stuff for about $4. Either way, I hope they don't get canceled. You're probably wondering, why is this tricky? It just looks like you're smearing glue all over. And you're right, but it's not always as easy as it looks. You have to make sure that you don't put too much on, or it'll look really weird and have strange bumps. And you can't put on too little either, because it might not be able to cover it all. I still haven't quite mastered this process. Now the hardest part of this is making sure that the papers don't curl and warp while they dry. What I do is wait a little bit so that it's somewhat dry, and then I place various objects on certain parts of the paper so that it has weight on it and won't warp. I mostly use paints because I don't care if they get Mod Podge on them or not. I mean, they already have paint on them. I recommend that you use bottles that have a fair amount of paint in them still, because they will be heavier. When you do this, make sure that you put the paper on something like a cutting board or another hard surface. If you do this on something like paper, it could tear off, get on your artwork, and it would be difficult to get off. And it would just be unpleasant overall. After I wait a little while, I take off each item that's on the paper and put it back. I do this to make sure that they don't stick. I do this in shifts until it's completely dry. You can probably see why I don't really Mod Podge all of my art anymore, unless I plan on selling it or something like that. In this case, I did it because it's a book cover and I want to protect it from the elements, oil, dirt, and all that other stuff books go through. Plus, I like how smooth it is after it's done. Now I'm just going to wipe off this cutting board so that the glue won't build up for next time. Next step, I'm going to add a little paint to this corner because I accidentally tore off this paper a bit and I want it to look like a whole cover. Now I will take this cutting board and put it between the cover and the pages so that it doesn't stick together when I put Mod Podge on. I make sure that it's lined up correctly and that it has enough pressure to keep it down. And I do the same thing with the other sides. It's not perfect. There are some things I wish I could have done differently, like the tear and the way I put the covers on. As you can see, it doesn't completely cover the book because of the slight contour. The paint certainly helps though, but overall I like the end result. I like the aesthetic, the colors, the idea, and how smooth it feels. Even if the cover doesn't last, I'm glad that I did it just for the experience and the change of pace. Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it. God bless you and have a good day.